He tried to ruin the sheriff's daughter, but one bullet from her father ended it all. The town of Oak Creek, lost among the sun-scorched canyons of Arizona, lived by its own laws, or rather, by the law established by Sheriff John Hollister. He was a man hardened in battles, with a soul forged from steel. In 1880, when Oak Creek had not yet become a large settlement, John took on this heavy burden to protect his only daughter, Evelyn, who, in his opinion, was the most valuable pearl in this dusty sea. Evelyn, with her golden locks constantly escaping from her neat hairstyle, and eyes the color of a clear sky, was the embodiment of kindness and vitality. She was not just the sheriff's daughter, but the heart of all of Oak Creek. She taught in a small school, healed the sick, helped the old settlers, and brought light to this harsh land. Everything changed with the arrival of Jack Kroll. This man was completely unlike the rough cowboys who passed through the town. Tall, elegant, in an impeccable black suit, he seemed to have stepped out of a picture. His manners were flawless, and his speech was smooth and ingratiating. He called himself an investor who had come to invest money in the gold mines. But John Hollister, whose instincts were sharper than a knife's edge, immediately became suspicious. There was no honesty in Kroll's eyes, only a lust for profit and cold calculation. From the very first minutes, he did not hide his interest in Evelyn. His gazes, full of predatory desire, followed her everywhere, and this fact was unbearable for her father. At first, Kroll tried to act politely. He invited Evelyn to dinner at the Silver Shovel, offered her expensive gifts, but Evelyn, raised with strictness and honor, always politely refused. She knew that something dark was hidden behind his smile. With each refusal, Kroll's politeness faded, and his true face began to show from under the gentleman's mask. One evening, he waited for her on her way home from school. "Evelyn, why are you so stubborn?" he asked, blocking her path. His voice was no longer so soft. "I'm offering you not just a life, but a royal life. In San Francisco, in a luxury you can't even imagine. Mr. Kroll, I've already said that I'm not interested. I like my life here," Evelyn replied calmly but firmly. His face was distorted. "This town is just dust, and your father is just a lawman with one gun. But I can make sure you end up at the bottom if you don't accept my offer," he hissed, and the threat in his voice was obvious. Evelyn returned home and, with tears in her eyes, told her father what had happened. Sheriff Hollister, hearing about the threats, felt fury boiling in his blood. He grabbed his revolver, but Evelyn stopped him. "No, father, please. He's too influential. He can destroy not only our lives, but the entire town. I heard him talking to the mayor about his debts. He has many people on a hook." John Hollister knew she was right. Injustice burned in his heart. He couldn't just go and kill this man. It would be suicide and a sure path to the destruction of everything he had built. He had to act smart, like a hunter, not like a cornered beast. He began to gather information. By day, he performed his duties as sheriff, and at night he secretly met with informants and studied Kroll's business methods. According to them, Kroll came to Oak Creek to buy up land plots with proven gold deposits, but he was hindered by locals who did not want to sell their land. With each passing day, the tension grew. Kroll increased the pressure, threatening people, promising them ruin. He even tried to bribe John, offering him untold riches if he would turn a blind eye to his methods. The sheriff, of course, refused, which angered Kroll even more. One evening, as Evelyn was returning home, Kroll set a trap for her. He sent two of his henchmen, burly, rough bandits, to talk to her. Intimidation didn't work, and they decided to grab her. Evelyn screamed. Her cry, piercing the silence of the deserted evening, was heard by a local boy, her old friend James. He had always been in love with Evelyn, but had never dared to confess his feelings. James, despite his fear, rushed to help. He managed to fight off one bandit, but the second one knocked him unconscious by hitting him on the head. Evelyn ran away, but fear had pierced her to the bone. She told her father what had happened to James. When Hollister rushed to the scene, he found James unconscious. This was the last straw. The pain for his friend, for his daughter, for the entire town that this man was trying to destroy overwhelmed him. Now it was not just the protection of his family, but a battle for the soul of the town. The next day, Kroll came to Hollister, smirking, and said that it was just a little warning. His face was full of contempt. "Hollister, you know I can take everything from you. The town, your daughter, your honor. What will you do when your daughter is the talk of the town?" His words were poisonous, full of innuendo. The sheriff struggled to contain his anger. He knew that Kroll was not just a bandit, but a man with power and connections. He decided to play differently, by his own rules. He pretended to give in. "All right, Kroll, I'll sell you my plot, and I'll leave. But in return, you'll leave everyone in town alone, especially my daughter." Kroll laughed. "Excellent. I knew you weren't as stupid as you look. It's a business deal, Sheriff. We'll both get what we want," he said, extending his hand. John Hollister shook his hand, but there was no submission in his eyes. A cold fire of revenge burned there. That evening, Evelyn, not understanding anything, witnessed her father packing his things. His face was pale but determined. "We're leaving, Evelyn. I can no longer risk your safety." "But the town, the people," tears streamed down her cheeks. "I've done all I could," the sheriff said quietly. "Now I must save you." Kroll triumphed. He was sure he had broken the sheriff, and now the entire town would be in his hands. He did not know that John Hollister was a man of honor, and he would not give up so easily. He was just biding his time to strike. He sold his plot, but there was a small, but very important detail in the documents. This was his last hope. Meanwhile, Kroll began to celebrate his victory. He threw a grand party in the Dead Horse Saloon, inviting all the influential people in town. He felt invincible. John Hollister and Evelyn also came. Everyone was surprised by their presence. The sheriff was not dressed in his usual strict uniform, but in civilian clothes, which only confirmed the rumors of his departure. "Mr. Hollister, you're not going to interfere with my triumph, are you?" Kroll asked mockingly. "I won't," the sheriff replied. "I'm here to witness your triumph, or its collapse." At the Dead Horse Saloon party, jubilation reigned. The stuffiness, mixed with the smell of tobacco, whiskey, and fried meat, filled the hall. Jack Kroll stood on the stage, raising his glass, and his predatory gaze swept over those present, stopping on Hollister and Evelyn. His smile was wide and venomous, like that of a rattlesnake preparing to strike. He couldn't quite believe that the sheriff, this unshakable rock, had broken under his pressure. This was his triumph, not just to take the land, but to destroy the opponent's spirit, to make him capitulate publicly. For him, it was more than business, it was a game of domination, where he always had to be the winner. "Gentlemen," Kroll's voice thundered, overpowering the noise. "Today, we celebrate the beginning of a new era for Oak Creek, an era of prosperity that I will bring to this godforsaken place. And, of course, I want to thank our former sheriff, John Hollister, for his reasonable decision. He understood that sometimes it's better to give in than to lose everything." Kroll's words were like sharp thorns, but Hollister remained imperturbable. He stood with his arms crossed over his chest, his face carved from stone, and only his eyes, deep and cold, watched Kroll's every move. Evelyn, squeezing her father's hand, felt anger and humiliation tearing her apart from the inside. "But since John so kindly agreed to leave, let's talk about more pleasant things. About the future of Oak Creek." Kroll's gaze fell on Evelyn, and his eyes sparkled. "And also, about the future of our Miss Hollister. I have no doubt that such a beautiful lady will not go unnoticed, and, perhaps, she will want to see the world that I can show her." At that moment, an old friend of John Hollister's, an old Indian named Stonehawk, standing in the corner of the saloon, quietly grunted. He was a longtime comrade of the sheriff, and was always ready to help. Hollister turned to him and gave a barely noticeable nod. This gesture was understood only by the two of them. "You talk too much, Kroll." Hollister's voice was calm, but there was a hidden threat in it. "You think you got everything, and didn't I? Your plot is mine, your reputation is trampled, What else do you have left?" He laughed maliciously, and his laughter was picked up by several of his henchmen. And then something happened that changed the course of events forever. Limping and with a bandaged head, James, the very guy whom Kroll's men had beaten, entered the hall. On his face was a grimace of pain and determination. He stepped forward and, pointing at Kroll, shouted, "He's a liar. He's not just a businessman. He's a killer. I saw him." A deathly silence fell in the hall. All eyes turned to James, then to Kroll. Kroll turned pale. His self-confidence instantly evaporated. He jumped off the stage, his hand reaching for his holster. "You're mistaken, boy," he growled. "You'd better shut up before I make you." "No," Evelyn cried out, taking a step forward. "He saw you try to kill the owner of the mine in the north." Evelyn's words were like a gunshot. Now everyone knew. Kroll was not just an investor. He was a dirty swindler and a murderer who wanted to get the gold at any cost. The air in the saloon thickened with tension. The faces of the people who, a minute ago, were laughing and drinking to his triumph were now full of rage and contempt. "And what will you say now, Kroll?" Hollister took a step forward, and his hand slowly reached for his holster. "I'll say you're a liar, Hollister, and I'll make you shut up." Kroll pulled out his revolver and aimed it at Evelyn. "I told you you'd regret it if you didn't accept my offer." It was the dirtiest blow imaginable. He was aiming at John Hollister's very heart, at his daughter. But Kroll didn't take one thing into account. Evelyn was the sheriff's daughter, not just in name. While Kroll was distracted, aiming his revolver at Evelyn, Stonehawk threw a small bag of sand at his feet. This momentary maneuver allowed Evelyn to react. She sharply pushed a table, creating a noise and making Kroll flinch. It was only a fraction of a second, but Hollister was too experienced a shooter. He saw Kroll's hand tremble. That was all he needed. "You can take my land, Kroll," Hollister said coldly, "but my daughter never." With those words, the sheriff pulled out his revolver and pulled the trigger. A shot shattered the silence, its echo rolling through the saloon. But it was not the shot everyone was expecting. The bullet flew past Kroll's head and shattered a bottle of whiskey on the shelf behind him. Then Hollister raised his revolver again, aiming it at Kroll, but did not shoot. You didn't shoot me." Kroll gasped in bewilderment. "No, I'll give you a chance to leave, but only because you're not worth my bullets," Hollister replied. "You'll have to face justice." Kroll lowered his revolver, his hands shaking. He felt all his power slipping through his fingers. His hatred for Hollister, who had humiliated him in front of everyone, was stronger than his fear. He decided to use a trick to buy time. He smiled and said, "All right, Sheriff, I'm leaving. But this isn't the end yet." The shot that rang out in the saloon was not fatal, but it was the beginning of the end for Jack Kroll. He was not killed, but his reputation was destroyed. Stripped of his main trump card invulnerability and the fear he instilled in people, Kroll turned from a powerful investor into a cornered animal. Hollister didn't miss. His bullet, shattering the bottle, was a warning. This was his personal trump card in this game. He showed everyone that he was not just a sheriff, but a man of honor who would not kill someone in the back or at a moment of humiliation. He gave Kroll a chance at justice, not a death by a bullet. This subtlety was his weapon. Within a few weeks, Oak Creek was filled with rumors and gossip. Some admired Hollister's coolness, others considered his action reckless, but everyone agreed on one thing: Kroll was broken. He was abandoned not only by the locals, but also by those who, until recently, were ready to follow him to the ends of the earth. At that moment, when Kroll no longer posed a threat, a mysterious marshal arrived in town. He had been hired by a company that wanted to acquire land in Oak Creek to build a railroad. The marshal, named William Blackwood, was a tall, strong man with sharp, piercing eyes and a determined look. He immediately felt that the atmosphere in the town was electrified, and his gaze fell on Sheriff Hollister. "Sheriff Hollister," the marshal said, walking up to him, "I've been tasked with looking into some matters. I need to know who this Kroll is and what happened here." Hollister calmly laid out the facts, neither embellishing or hiding anything. He told him about Kroll's attempt to dishonor his daughter, about his threats, his land swindles, and how he had staged the attack on James. The marshal listened carefully, without interrupting, and his face remained impassive, but there was a flicker of interest in his eyes. "And what are you going to do with him?" the marshal asked. "I'm waiting for him to make a mistake," Hollister replied. "I'm not going to act like a bandit. I want him to get what he deserves." "I understand," the marshal said, "but, if you don't mind, I'd like to talk to Evelyn myself." Evelyn agreed to meet with the marshal. Although her heart was still full of anxiety, she told the marshal how Kroll had tried to destroy her life, about his threats, and his dirty methods. She was not afraid. Her voice was firm and confident, and the marshal was amazed by her strength of spirit. In this time, Kroll, feeling the ground slipping from under his feet, began to act. He knew that time was working against him. He decided that the only way to save himself was to destroy Hollister and his daughter. He hired several ruthless thugs who were supposed to kidnap Evelyn and use her as a hostage to extort money and intimidate the sheriff. One day, as Evelyn was returning home, she felt that she was being followed. She saw a shadow flash around the corner of the house, and fear took root in her heart. She quickly turned into an alley, trying to get away from her pursuers, but they were faster. One of the thugs grabbed her from behind, another ran up from the front, and she felt her mouth being covered with a dirty rag. She tried to scream, but her voice was muffled. She fought with all her might, but they were too strong. At that moment, Stonehawk appeared. He was old, but his sight and hearing were still sharp. He saw Evelyn being grabbed, and anger flashed in his eyes. He knew he couldn't openly fight two armed men. He hid behind some boxes and let out a puff of smoke from his pipe, which was so acrid that the thugs immediately began to cough. This was enough for Evelyn to break free and run toward the house. Then James ran out of the house. He was scared, but his determination to protect Evelyn was stronger than his fear. He knocked down one of the thugs and then pulled out his revolver, aiming it at the second one. But James was an inexperienced shooter, and his hand was shaking. He couldn't shoot. The thug smirked and aimed his revolver at him. At that moment, Sheriff Hollister ran out of the house. He heard Evelyn scream and realized that Kroll had crossed the line. His rage was boundless. He saw the thug aiming at James, and lightning flashed in his eyes. He shot, and the bullet hit the thug right in the shoulder. He fell, dropping his revolver, and Hollister pounced on him and began to beat him. Kroll, who was watching everything from around the corner, saw that his plan had failed. He pulled out his revolver and aimed it at the sheriff. "Hollister, I warned you," he growled. "You'll regret not killing me back then." But before he could shoot, Marshal Blackwood appeared from behind. He quickly, without unnecessary words, pulled out his revolver and aimed it at Kroll. "Jack Kroll," the marshal said, "you're under arrest for murder, for fraud, for the attempted kidnapping of the sheriff's daughter, and for assaulting civilians." Kroll was furious. He hadn't expected the marshal to show up so timely, but even at that moment, he wasn't going to give up. He twitched, trying to pull out his weapon, but the marshal was faster. His shot rang out, and the bullet hit Kroll in the leg. He fell to the ground, his face contorted in pain. "Now you can't run," the marshal said, walking up to him. It was a triumph of justice that seemed to instill hope in everyone who witnessed the scene. Hollister hadn't killed Kroll, but his action had a much greater effect. He made everyone understand that justice, however slow, would always find its way. He didn't become a bandit to fight a bandit, but remained a sheriff. Kroll's arrest was not the end of the story, but merely its climax. Although he was caught, the town was still uneasy. His thugs had not disappeared, they were lurking, waiting for a moment to take revenge for their leader. Hollister knew this and did not relax. He did not leave the town, on the contrary. He began to strengthen order, preparing for a new confrontation. At the trial, which took place a few days later, Kroll denied everything, trying to convince everyone of his innocence. He accused Sheriff Hollister and Evelyn of lying, trying to tarnish their reputation. But his words had no power. Witnesses, including James and Stone Hawk, gave testimonies that fully confirmed Hollister's words. In the end, Kroll was found guilty and sentenced to a long prison term. However, during transportation to prison, the convoy was attacked. The bandits hired by Kroll set up an ambush. As a result of the shootout, Kroll managed to escape, and his men killed 2 of the sheriff's deputies. Hollister was wounded in the shoulder. Kroll escaped and immediately headed to Oak Creek. He wanted to take revenge on Hollister, but, more importantly, he wanted to forever destroy the one who had caused his downfall, Evelyn. Meanwhile, Evelyn, unaware of the escape, went to the canyon where a rare species of flowers grew, which she collected to treat the sick. It was her favorite place, a place where she could be alone with her thoughts. Kroll, knowing this, set a trap for her. He was wounded and angry, but his hatred gave him strength. He hid behind a rock and waited. He didn't want to kill her right away. He wanted her to feel the fear he was experiencing. "Well, Evelyn," his voice echoed through the canyon, "did you think you got rid of me? Did you think I would just give up?" Evelyn flinched. She realized she was trapped. Kroll came out from behind the rock, his face distorted with rage. He was armed. "I wanted to ruin you, but now I'll destroy you," he growled. "Your father won't make it in time. He's wounded. He's helpless." But Kroll didn't know that Sheriff Hollister, despite his wound, could not leave his daughter in danger. He heard gunshots in the canyon and, without hesitation, headed there. At that moment, Evelyn, who had always seemed fragile, gentle, and weak, showed her true strength. She remembered her father's words, "Even if you don't have a weapon in your hands, you have your wits. Use them." She saw a large stone on the ground and, not thinking twice, threw it at Kroll. Kroll flinched, dodging the stone, and his attention was distracted for a second. That was enough. At that moment, Evelyn rushed to run, but Kroll fired. The bullet flew past, but its sound, echoing off the rocks, was like thunder. Evelyn continued to run, and Kroll, limping, went after her. He was obsessed with revenge. Sheriff Hollister heard the shot and quickened his pace. He felt the pain in his shoulder intensify, but his anger was stronger. He saw Evelyn running through the canyon, and Kroll chasing her. He pulled out his revolver and took aim. He knew he only had one chance. He couldn't let Kroll harm his daughter again. He fired, and this time he didn't miss. One single bullet. It hit Kroll in the head. He fell, his lifeless body rolling over the rocks, and only the echo of the shot resonated through the canyon. Sheriff Hollister ran to Evelyn and hugged her. He knew his daughter would never be the same again. She had gone through a lot, and it had made her stronger. He understood that his main task was not to protect her from the whole world, but to give her the opportunity to find her own strength. Evelyn, looking at her father, understood that the shot he had fired was not just a shot of revenge, but a shot that had given her life. It freed her from fear, from the threat, from the constant feeling of danger. Conclusion and lesson: the story of Evelyn and her father, Sheriff Hollister, shows that true strength is not power or money, but honor, courage, and the ability to protect those you love. In those distant times, as in our own, people like Kroll try to achieve their goals using deception and manipulation. They may seem influential, but their foundation is always fragile because it is built on lies. The main lesson of this story is that one must fight for one's beliefs, for one's family, and for one's honor. Evelyn, who always seemed fragile and vulnerable, found the strength and courage to stand up to evil, and her father, John Hollister, showed that a true hero is not someone who just shoots, but someone who does the right thing, even when it is difficult. He didn't become a bandit to fight a bandit, but remained on the side of law and justice. This story is a reminder that it is important to stay true to your principles and believe that good always wins, because it possesses a power that cannot be bought or stolen, the power of the spirit. In today's world, where there is so much deception and injustice, it is important to remember that our words and actions matter. Just as one shot from Sheriff Hollister's revolver forever changed his daughter's life, so can one honest act of ours, one small victory over a lie, inspire many.